Good afternoon and good evening, and welcome to the Zero Waste Asia Newsroom. I'm Sonia Astudillo, Senior Communications Officer for GAIA Asia Pacific, and we're here to bring you the latest updates on the third day of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee on Plastic Pollution, currently being held in Paris. On the second day of the negotiations at INC2, progress has been hindered as delegates remain at odds over the rules of procedure. The disagreement primarily involves countries advocating for a decision-making process based on consensus. This means that all countries have to agree on the contents of the treaty before a decision is reached. Civil society organizations are pushing for voting rights, which means that a majority vote can lead to a decision on the treaty contents that is favorable to countries pushing for a strong treaty. With only 2 remaining days at INC2, CSOs are keen on seeing things to move forward to the actual treaty discussions. To shed light on this ongoing situation, we are joined by Arpita Bhagat, the Plastic Policy Officer at GAIA Asia Pacific. Hi Arpita, we're glad you're here again. Now, this is midday of the third day of the INC2. Could you give us an update on the status of the ongoing debate regarding the rules of procedure? Has a resolution been reached, or what steps has the UNEP taken to facilitate progress in the negotiations?
Hi, Sonia, and everybody watching from their homes. I want to apologize, first of all, for being late today. Has dragged on. We are facing internet concerns, and I'm glad I'm finally here, and I hope that members can be a little flexible with the schedule, given that things are moving very fast and things are also moving very slow. So there was no resolution reached as such to the rules of procedure, especially regarding Rule 38.1. The first point that I read yesterday, if members could refer back to that. And negotiations, I wouldn't call them negotiation, but open group consultations running with several states talking to each other in very informal settings all of yesterday. In fact, many till 1 a.m. in the night. And this was especially difficult for those who could not be staying, member states who were not staying close to the UNESCO building could not have afforded to stay here, right? Because of course, this area, this building is expensive. And if you were staying far away, a lot of member states had to go back home. This included, interestingly, Russia as well. Russia has been known to be one of the countries who is in favor of consensus. So the negotiations went on till late in the night. There were different versions of the text that was discussed. And there is good and bad to that. The informal consult on Rule 38.1, they came at an understanding that members have proposition, which I'm going to read out. This is the official statement that the chair delivered this morning. The INC understands that based on discussion on the INC draft rules of procedure, there are differing views among INC members on Rule 38.1 and its reflection in its report on INC. One, therefore, the provisional application of 38.1, which is how we have been operating so far, right? Rules have been applied provisionally. They are still subject to debate. In event 38.1 is invoked, because before rules are formally adopted, members recall this lag of agreement. Essentially, this states that there is no acceptance of the Rule 38, specifically 38.1. There is also no consensus about the voting or rights of the rule. And currently we are operating under what has been called as positive ambiguity. That means the two sides, we know that there were 2 blocks, one in favor of consensus and the other in favor of voting. They have not reached a consensus, so both sides do not have anything against any side. And now essentially, there is room for ongoing confusion. And what this would mean is that as we go into the discussion on the substance of the treaty through the contact groups that we talked about earlier, which is about to start, I suppose, in the next hour or so, we will operate in this ambiguity. And it will totally depend on, I'm not a legal person, but it will totally depend on what needs to be achieved. Since consensus has not been achieved, what happens is not defined. Basically, this will only postpone the treaty negotiations and the outcome. It does not in any way mean there is resolution. So by the time the delegates get to the point where there is lack of consensus, if we get to a point on any discussion on meat of the treaty that there is lack of consensus, delegates, anybody can raise objections. But this sentence has allowed us to move forward. And I feel the frustration that came, especially from the African countries, for example, who are fighting very hard to have voting approach applied, at least this allows us to move forward. But it allows us to move forward at a slow pace. We've also lost 2.5 days of the 5-day duration. And now, based on when the contact groups where substance will be discussed starts, we know that we will only have limited time. So yeah, it allows us a corner and to be able to get into substance discussion. Eventually, somebody could raise an objection in the future, and we don't know. So this is important, and this is good to know that most of the multilateral environmental agreements have always had both consensus and voting options. And if you think about Minamata, if you think about Montreal, this existed. The only two exceptions that I'm aware of is Rotterdam and UNFCCC, under which Paris Agreement is designed. And we know that both of these treaties are a big failure in terms of the ambition that they carry. So that's the overarching messaging that the movement has. And the movement is also working to create different briefs, and GAIA is part of that, which will help demystify what these regulations are, what could potentially happen, and just to help members understand it better. So as soon as that's available to me, I will pass it on to all of you to spread it around.
Okay, thanks, Arpita. So just to clarify, still no resolution and no acceptance of the rules on voting. No? So amidst this ongoing debate, some are suggesting that certain countries are using these deliberations as a tactic to delay the actual discussions. In light of this, can the open-ended working group that was created by UNEP successfully resolve these deliberations and ensure progress moving forward? Have they delivered a report to the plenary?
Like I said, Sonia, there is no successful resolution. The text has been suggested and has been allowed, but that text essentially means nothing. It's pretty ambiguous. I'm referring to Rule 38.1. Essentially, what this means is that unless there is consensus, decision cannot be made. And if somebody wants to raise an issue, they can still do so. So we were looking for an option to vote because that really helps in getting to a compromise. If people know that there is no option of voting, they can say no, and then the entire point of discussion falls apart. And that's what has been happening in UNFCCC, right? Where the not very ambitious countries, the petrochemical hubs of the world, the rich countries, the oil-producing nations have successfully kept the ambition very low, right? Because they raise objection, and there's no agreement that is reached, and basically it lands nowhere, and everything falls apart. So that's not going to happen, hopefully, here. Hopefully, as we move forward, we have countries who are in favor of voting to raise their objections and have a positive move forward. So it's neither bad nor good right now. It's a pretty neutral stance, and it remains to be seen in the contact groups where substance will be discussed. I think right now we are just relieved that we are getting to substance, hopefully in the next hour.
Okay, so how are the CSOs responding to all this? We've seen several actions reported. What is the situation there now on the grounds?
There is some hope, and there is some disappointment, and there is some frustration. I think it's a mix of all three. I think particularly given I'm from the Asia Pacific, I was disappointed by the statement that came from the Asia Pacific group this morning, which was delivered by the Filipino delegation, which essentially focused more on the downstream. And in the upstream, they focused more towards the redesign and reuse. And it was, and they're also mostly in favor of consensus. So that's disappointing. That's where we are. Civil society is working hard to keep negotiating to find points, commonalities with the delegates and essentially provide them a case to keep pushing for voting. So far, we hear very good words coming from countries like Senegal, Tunisia, um, as well as many other African states and the Latin America countries as well, as well as the SIDS. The SIDS, the small island states are fighting pretty hard right now, and my heart goes out to them because they're really at the worst impact of this pollution crisis. So a lot is happening, a lot is unpredictable in these negotiations in this kind of atmosphere, and this can turn pretty quickly, and we'll have to remain guard and remain watchful and remain hopeful as well.
So we have a question here. Let's talk about Global South. What are the implications of these delays for Africa, Asia Pacific, and Latin America?
Well, the implication is essentially frustration. It's a loss of resources. Like I said, we are the ones who do not have the kind of resources that are required to come and travel all the way and to participate. And we are the ones who are continuing to reel under the plastic crisis. If production cuts are not achieved, we will continue to have more and more of this polluting substance to deal with. Oh, by the way, that reminds me, Pakistan this morning made a very favorable statement, and they talked very powerfully about chemical transparency and the need for phase out of toxic chemicals that are added to plastic, which I was very happy about, our next door neighbor. So there is hope, and I think it's a matter of how we are able to organize and how we are able to provide space and power to those who are the most impacted. So we are still hopeful. We are still, I think it's going to be Friday end of day that I could tell you better on how much progress is made and how much we are close to reaching the zero draft. And if we are, going to be able to actually achieve the 2024 timeline to draft the treaty.
So for the sake of our viewers, can you again give us a brief rundown of the demands from the Global South?
Yes, we have a lot of demands, and I think it also depends on the situation and economics of the country. I'm sorry, I'll have to move. And I think I would really urge folks to refer back to the media briefing that was so excellently covered and comprehensive. I think first of all, we want production cuts. There is absolutely no doubt about it. I think all civil society across the globe want it, because unless you close the tap, you cannot really stop this crisis, right? If we know that carbon emissions, for example, are polluting the planet, we have to stop the carbon emissions from happening, like the case with climate I like to go back to. So that's number one. Number two is keeping false solutions out. These false solutions only make the problem worse. Waste energy, incineration in various forms, waste co-processing, emissions, and there's so many more technologies, chemical recycling, and I could go on, which basically change the form of the pollution, but only sort of through causing air pollution, land crisis. And of course, I think one more problem is the bioplastic that has become being pushed so much, which is a debate between food and fuel crisis, but also the fact that the biodegradability or compostability that these plastics are claimed as are greenwashing. There are no standards, there are no acceptable technologies currently which are safe, which are healthy for processing these kind of plastics. So we need to be aware of these. The third one is a new one called offsetting plastic credits. That's another format of carbon credits and carbon offsetting that we all know from the climate movement is a complete failure, and is industry move to continue business as usual that we need to be wary of and careful of. And I see a lot of that coming in Asia, actually, so a concern. The next one is just transition. How are we, if we are calling for cuts, if you're calling for basically change in the system, we need to ensure that we are taking waste pickers and workers along that chain so that we are able to provide them with the money, the training, and the skills that is needed for them to transform our system, because we're really the backbone of the plastics value chain and economy. It applies to informal workers, especially across the value chain. Even if we stop the tap now, we will still have 10 to 20, maybe more years to go through this just transition. So that's something that we are trying to amplify, and we're trying to ensure is represented. And there's so many voices that we need to go to that we spoke about that earlier. Indigenous peoples, for example, I know they're organizing and they're producing their demand, and many allied movements as well. Yeah, I think these are the broad strokes of the demands, unless we're getting some specific. We also have the GAIA key demands document that folks can go to. It also talks about chemical transparency that I've mentioned multiple times in these discussions. Plastics have a lot of toxic additives, which have big health effects, especially for those employed in the plastic value chain. So these need to be at the earliest, right? Because we don't even know what's happening to our bodies as a result of this toxic substance. So I would really urge you all to look at the key demands that GAIA has produced. We also have an analysis of options paper. That's basically the draft that we will go into the discussion on substance of the treaty. That will become the grounding for discussion on the substance of the treaty. And it's a long document, but our analysis is pretty short and simple, and people can access it online and really think about what they would want in the treaty.
Okay.
Sonia?
Thank you so much, Arpita. So last question, with 2 more remaining days or 2.5, are we expecting major developments? If yes, what could those be? And if no, what are the CSOs? What are CSOs planning to do about it? Do we just all come home brokenhearted from Paris?
No, we will not go brokenhearted. I think if anything, we will go stronger and more encouraged to keep on. We still have 2.5 days. The movie is only halfway over, like we say in India. So I would wait, and I would hopefully bring back the report in the next 24 hours to you. And I'm really hoping that there will be something good to talk about. Like, I'm pretty sure what I heard today from some of the countries was pretty encouraging, right? So we are doing our work. We are meeting with delegates. Some of our members are here, and we are really trying our best and keep trying. And I just want to remind everybody, even if the treaty result and the treaty draft itself is weak, we still have our national movement work. We still have our national legislation work to keep going. So this is not in any way. And I also want to remind everyone it's World No Tobacco Day, and the tobacco movement who've been really becoming our allies since the last INC are here. And I think they've released a statement. They're asking for bans on the plastic contents in cigarette butts, which is really unnecessary, right? Then we really we need to support them, and we really also need to start thinking about which area of our life is plastic really unnecessary, and where do we actually really need it, and only keep it there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Arpita. So it's really a mixture of frustration, disappointment, but mostly hope, and no one's going home brokenhearted. So thank you, Arpita, for keeping us abreast of the latest development there in Paris. Join us again tomorrow as we follow the progress of the ongoing INC2. You may also check out our social media platforms as we bring you the latest highlights and developments of the negotiations. Again, thank you and good evening. Thanks, Arpita.
Thank you, everyone, and a good night.
Good night.